Great time waster and helps you relax and get out of the studio.
I went over there to play basketball.
To play the annoying game.
Annoying game.
Mine. You guys have your hard drive.
When I go to other
Ties and partition it. It's the whole. Do you have Lion?
Yeah.
Okay, Lion has a crazy.
No, I have to accept it. Did you already have it?
I partitioned it for it.
How much did you do?
I gave it 100, but that's in case you want to put other stuff on there.
Type, it's always
But because you can't partition it again.
So then did you do this first?
He's missed it.
But you have to delete everything
Yeah,
off.
it's a pain in the ass. I'm not.
Yeah.
I have this.
Save that.
Basically, you run the camp constructor, and it will tell you when to put in the disk.
Okay.
And you're using the Windows 7.
Did away with all that.
And then you don't do this until, well, once you get like the Windows,
Yeah, that's true though.
you
So I guess then
you
you're gonna
use that,
have
you
to,
run that. Because that's the authentication code. So it's like the registration, yeah. You just close it out when it asks for the CD key or whatever.
Okay.
But one of the problems you may have that I ran into was during the process it had you
what
burn
you
a
need to
disk.
do is,
And
because
when you burn that disk,
reference itself,
that's like the drive
you
through
actually
you
have
need for
to,
boot camp.
Sure.
And what you may have to do, what I did, is once the Windows disk is done, then you need to get that out and then get that disk in before you get into the Windows system. It's not a big deal, but your computer won't eject the disk if it's in Windows if you don't have the burnt disk in. Because the burnt disk makes it so that
Will you be around tomorrow?
transfer across.
I'll be around.
I'd like to do it tomorrow here at school.
I didn't
I mean,
studio.
what you could do.
Carson helped me out, but I can help you if you're around.
You just want to make sure that after
Like in another
you get everything
category.
like installed on the Windows
Have
side,
that
you put that driver's just gonna burn.
Like have the 9Z.
That's right, I just have it.
9Z times.
Yeah, you'll see, but I'll help you if you need it.
Okay.
And if you do that on each, do
Because you just
that
like
on one type,
basically
all of your types will.
Did you get the high score?
Really?
It's just now you have 20 parameters to deal with.
You went to one of those and the thing is not enough.
And you'd have to go back and read some parameters. I would just probably just decide.
Little long week.
Why did you? Why did you? I'm ready to do that. It's probably
Well, that's what it was. Today's last day.
I wish I'm gonna go.
It's gonna be close. Close at 8.
Oh, did that? I thought they were open till 9. Never mind.
Maybe it will be 9, but even if that's the case, Brian, you don't want to go
Right
because,
there at 8, they're gonna love you.
and they're already closing stuff down, they're not gonna have everything. It's a bad idea to go at 8 o'clock, but you don't want something.
This was about review board market run.
But have you good with those two first?
Yeah.
Get started here in about a minute.
Close to each other. This is on the right side of the model. Right side of the model.
Yeah.
Almost add like 7 to that.
That's a lot of there.
Yeah, we'll check that out later.
I don't understand. Well, like I tried to
Just see like correct space for all blood.
Why did you do it right?
Scales. I've never paid attention to how big I'm doing. You can scale it whenever you want. All right. Well,
You guys have probably noticed that I didn't update anything on the website. I said I was going to add a tutorial, and I didn't get a chance to do that yet. I'm going to try to get caught up this weekend after my trip. Today, first of all, I know some of you are still having some issues here and there on your curves. What kind of problems are we still having? You guys want to just speak up right now? I know you guys have sent a lot of little texts to me when you do a file upload. I haven't had a chance to review all your files. Issue number 1, anybody?
Can we increase the amount of points we have after we already did it?
After you've made
If the curves need to be tighter than they are.
Yeah, unfortunately, the curves are all connected by the amount of points that you first put, and you can't just add in another point. So you have to dissolve. There's a dissolve button. Let me load up Central Mass here. And you have to dissolve it and keep all your parameters. So if I actually load up one of my curves. So if you have your curve and you eventually, I think I have my dimensions turned off so you can't see all this stuff. So you have all your parameters. If you were to add in another point, I think you can, that's always just going to be a point on the curve. I don't know if we can move this one. Yeah, that. So it's not going to allow you to just add in a point. So what you'd have to do is click on it and hit the dissolve button. That will take away the curve but maintain all of your properties and all of your points. And then you could set up your other points that you need to add in and the additional properties that you're going to need. And then do the spline through points again. Okay. You might want to save what I did at the very beginning. If you remember, you created a set of points that were basically in a straight line, and then you did your spline through points. And I actually saved in my types the original setup. You may want to go back to something similar so that you can come in and add the amount of points that you need and make sure you get that spline to, you know, go from point 1 through 10 in order, or however many points you're going to need.
Okay.
Where was that dissolve button?
The dissolve button is if you just click on the line or the mass or anything that you're working with, up on the top right, you'll get a dissolve. Because if you delete, if I go back here and I click on this line and I hit delete, all the points and all the parameters and everything that you just set up go away. So you definitely don't want to do that. Issue number 2, who else have issues?
If you have like a few curves made already and you add a point, what happens to all your line text? Or your, I don't know if that makes sense what I'm trying to ask.
So if you set up like 9, let's say you have 9 curves set up and then you go back and you're going to start adding in points and the parameters, you're going to have to go back into each of the types and define where those points need to occur. Okay. Because your curve is always going to be established by all the parameters that are associated with those points and everything that you set up. So when you first set that up, let's say you have a point at 999, and then 9 foot, 9 foot, 9 foot, and you add that in. When you switch to another type, that point will still be at the original 999. And so you'd have to keep going in and adjusting it for each of the curves. So just be careful with that. Any other questions real quick? All right, so today what I wanted to do is go over a couple more parametric strategies. Right now we've been dealing with kind of understanding exactly where points occur in space in the X, Y, and Z, and then defining our curves by this whole set of points. I want to start going over some other tools that are available in the conceptual mass, and also get into adaptive wireframe components. And what I'm doing is I'm going to show you these strategies so that as you begin to develop and continue to work on your curves and your forms and even your bridge component or tower component, you may want to implement some of these other strategies because it might solve some of the issues you're currently having with this method. What I'm showing you so far is just one method of, maybe establishing a parametric spline and these surfaces that we can eventually update as well. Couple things I wanted to go over real quick. I'll go ahead and close out of whatever file you're in, or files. And if you just open up a plain new conceptual mass environment, some of you have asked if there's other ways to make surfaces other than just the kind of this lofted set of curves and points that we're dealing with. And the answer is yes, we can actually do some sweeps within the conceptual mass environment. When I talked about it last class, when I said we couldn't, I meant we couldn't use the kind of traditional sweep tool. But there is a method here that if you just go ahead and draw a spline, so I just picked the spline through points, and since I don't have any points, it wants me to go ahead and place all of my points. I hit escape when I'm done. If you have any kind of model line that has a reference point associated with it, so these blue or these purple points that are on each of the splines, we can turn the reference planes on just like we have been doing. So if you click on just like the endpoint and click on always, so that we get the surface normal plane. If you draw anything on this plane that's associated with this point that's to the surface normal of this curve, it could be any kind of profile. As long as we draw something on that plane and it's perpendicular to this curve, we can select both of them and then create a sweep with the create form command. So I'm just going to make a simple pipe real quick. So I'm going to use the circle command, and before I can draw I need to pick my placement plane. So you probably want to be in a 3D view so you can see all of this, but go ahead and hit pick, and then I'm going to hover over this reference plane and I'll go ahead and pick that. And one of the annoying things is as soon as I do that, my drawing command takes me off of the circle and takes me back to the default line. So I'm still in this command. I need to go back and click on circle, and then I can click on the center point, and I'll just draw a whatever size circle. And you can always click on this circle and then change the dimension. So I might make it a 1 foot, make it a small pipe. So if you just click on the circle, you get the temporary dimension, and then you can click on that to enter in whatever value you want. So now that you have these this profile that's perpendicular to the spline, if you click on, I don't think it really matters the order, if you click on one of them and hold in the control key and click on the circle and then say create form, you now get this profile that does a sweep all the way across your Everyone get that to work out? Yep.
Like a short little one.
So if you have your profile, you have your circle right there. Have you gotten to this step?
Yeah.
Okay. So once you have this set up, you can use any kind of profile shape. It doesn't have to be a circle, but if you click on the line, hold in control, and then click on the profile, and then under create form, create a solid form. So I could also do that with, if I delete the circle, as long as I'm on that plane, I go to placement plane, I'm going to hit pick. I'm going to select the surface normal plane again. And once I do that, I can, in this case, I'll draw, going back to that line. So I'm going to draw like a wing, this 3-point curve type thing. And as long as all your profile points are all connected, you'll be able to select it. You notice when I hover over, I can select these two lines all at one time. So I could go back here and click on both of them again and hit create solid form. And then I get my sweep to happen. So basically with that method, what you'd want to have established is a set of points that are on this spline that you could actually move. So you probably want to set up those points first, kind of like we've already done in some of these other curves. At least have 4 or 5 points that have some ability to move the dimensions. And then your profile shape could also have its own set of parameters as well. So I could have, before I made this, let me go back to my circle. I could have had a parameter here set to the radius of my pipe. So if I just create I'll just call it R for now. And if I set this dimension for that profile shape to a parameter that changes its size, you can now create the form. And once it's created, you can come back here to the family type properties, and then you're able to edit the size of your pipe or whatever many other parameters you want to add into there. And you'll see that on one side I've got this really huge, kind of the 7-foot radius on this end, but then on the other end it kind of tapers down. That's because Revit's assuming that since you didn't apply a parameter to this other side, that you don't want that one to change. So if you wanted them to be equal, I'd have to tab over. Select your solid, and in order to get the profile components to show up, we have to turn on the X-ray, excuse me, the X-ray tool, and that allows me to select my other end where I can get that dimension. And if you see what I'm doing is I'm clicking on this form element edge, I get my temporary dimension, and there's this little symbol, kind of this dimension symbol down at the bottom. On any temporary dimension, if you click on that symbol, it'll make it into a permanent dimension. Then I can click that dimension to give it its radius. And now I have my form that has the 7-foot radius on either side. Okay, I'm going to show you guys, let's cancel out of that. In this same file, let's create, go into an elevation view. So just pick one, doesn't matter, it could be the north elevation. I'm going to set up a datum line. When you first start, all of your drawings that you've been working in right now have just had a level 1 datum plane. But if you click on the home and then click on level datum, you can draw another level. So you just kind of left click on one side and right click on the other. And as soon as you do that, you get another level view that pops up under your floor plans. This gives you the ability to draw on the level 1 plane or the level 2 plane by drawing in the floor plan views. What I'm going to do is in level 1, if I double click on it, I switch to the floor plan view. I'm going to just draw 2 splines again, the same command over here, spline through points. I'm just kind of create something that looks like this. Doesn't have to be exact, just so that they vary. And then in level 2, I'm going to draw another spline that kind of meanders down through the middle. And so now when I look at my 3D view, you can see that that other spline, because we're in level 2, is up on the level 2 plane and is up and above. So you can click on that level 2 plane and you see you get those dimensions again. You can change that dimension, and anything that you drew that was associated with that level 2 plane will move up and down with it. I'm going to save this real quick.
Jeremy, whenever I set a new level data, it doesn't create a new floor plan level, like over in the...
Okay.
Mine just like, it won't create a new one. Or it'll show that there's a new level there, and it'll let me make one, but it won't. It doesn't reflect in the project browser.
So then when you're in your elevation view and you're going to make another level, when you click on the level data and look up in your green options bar, there's a little box that says make plan view. Make sure that that's checked.
Yeah, it is.
And then right click or left click again off of this space. So add it in. You didn't finish drawing the line, basically. You have to snap on the start and the end point. Okay. So I went ahead and saved that, and I'm just going to call that kind of a wireframe set of rails. Under View and User Interface, click on Recent Files. We're going to jump into a new family type called General or Generic Model Adaptive. This is where we start to get into what's called adaptive components.
Where was generic model adaptive?
Click under View, User Interface, Recent Files, and say New Families. And you should get this dialog box to select a template file. And then you click on Generic Model Adaptive. If you're not using everyone's using Revit 2012, right? If you have on your own personal computer for some reason, an older version like 2011, it's not called Generic Model Adaptive, but the same thing is under a conceptual mass, and it's called Adaptive Component. In 2012, they changed it to be called Generic Model Adaptive. I don't know why, but
To make it more difficult for you.
yeah. Show you that they're changing things.
Yeah. I didn't know where it was. They moved it.
So the adaptive component is basically a set of points that we can create. It'll just be reference points. That if we draw a set of lines to connect to those reference points, when we bring that component into another file, when we place those points associated to, let's say, a wireframe rail, like we're about to, it will always snap those points to the geometry that you've already created. And that's why it's called adaptive. So as you place this component over and over again, it's going to constantly change depending on its placement to the other geometry. It'll make more sense once we just do it. So it doesn't really matter what view you're in because it's an adaptive component. It's going to be placed by the number of points that you create. One thing that you have to keep in mind is when you set something up like this, I'm back in my wireframe rails. I have 3 rails that I'm going to connect to. Therefore, in my adaptive component, I'm going to want to set up 3 points. If I happen to want 5 rails, I'm going to want 5 adaptive points, and so on and so forth. So just remember your rails have to equal the number of points that you're going to use in your adaptive component. So I'm going to switch back to, I'm going to be in like a floor plan view in this adaptive component. And under the Home tool, we'll place our point element. And I'm just going to click on, I'll make a point up here, one down here, and one over here. Make like a triangle. Once I've done that, if I select them all, as soon as I do that, in the adaptive component family, I get this other additional tool up here that says Make Adaptive. So right now we've just placed these points, but they're not adaptive points. So by selecting all of these points again, if we click on Make Adaptive, you should get your points numbered, and they're going to be numbered in the order that you place them. I can click on the number, and I can change them. So I changed this one on the bottom left to 1, and then my other one's modified to be in a different order, 1, 2, and 3, because you can't have a point numbered the same. So if I
on a number?
yeah, you can just left click on a number, and so if you want them in a different order for some reason, you want this one to be point, your 3rd point. Now what these numbers are telling you is when you place your adaptive component, this is the order of your clicks. So you have to determine, or keep track of the order of how you're going to place this component when you bring it into another project. For now, I'm just going to keep it in this order, having the 1 on the bottom left, the 2 in the middle, top, and then 3 on the one that's remaining. Everyone get that so far?
No, number disappears when you change it. Or mine disappears.
What do you mean they disappeared? You may have to kind of zoom in and out a little bit. You see how my number up here disappeared? But if I zoom in, it comes back. It's some sort of graphic card thing right now. Okay, so I'm going to draw a model line. So at the very top here, now that we're in this environment, there's model lines and reference lines, and I haven't gone over the difference yet, and I will a little bit. But we want to click on model line, and I'm going to also click on, so I've got my straight line, and in the options bar, that's this green bar at the top, that changes with each time you click on something. There's a command there called 3D snapping. You have to make sure that that's checked, because what we're going to be doing is snapping this line to these points. Even though they're in 2D right now, eventually when you bring it into another environment, these will be placed in a 3D environment. And if you don't have 3D snapping on, your 2D element is not going to be adaptive. It's just going to kind of stay on the plane, and it's not going to stretch to the different rails that you want. So if you ever notice that your adaptive component is not reacting the way you want, it's probably because you did not click on 3D snapping. All right, so now I'm going to make sure I click on each of the points.
Do you want main surface from closed loops checked off?
Just make sure 3D snapping, and then you can also make sure chain is checked. We're not going to make a surface from the closed loops at this point. So when I'm done, I'm just kind of making a triangle. I'll make sure I've connected all three, and then I'll hit escape when I'm done. Now, because this is a new family, I want to name it something, so I need to save it. And I'll call this adaptive. Just call this adaptive component. And now we can load it into the project. So you should have this button at the top right that says load into project. And it should bring you into this other environment where what we want to be in is the 3D view with the brackets. And I'm going to type in VG, V as in Victor, G as in girl. And I'm going to click on annotations and turn off my reference points. So down at the very bottom, there's reference points and then points. Turn off the one that's at the very bottom, just called points. The reason I'm doing that is what we want to do is snap to the endpoints of these rails. And because there's also a reference point that's associated with the endpoint of the rails, when we start placing our adaptive component, it's probably going to snap to the point, and then it's only going to want to stay at the end. And I want it to actually slide up and down the rails. So by doing that, I make it so I don't accidentally select those. Now under the home key, or part of the menu, click on home. I'm going to place a component. Because this is another family that we created, I'm going to click on family, and you should have your pull down menu here to the left. And we only had one type associated called adaptive component. So the order that I'm going to place this, you can see when you hover over the different rails, you should be able to get the endpoint snap. It should be a square that shows up. So I'm going to start with the lower left rail. Make sure you snap to the endpoint. Then I'm going to snap to the one that's up top, and then the other one. So you see how it kind of stretched your triangle. And when you click on it, you should see your points, your 1, 2, and 3 show up. Everyone get that?
My triangle didn't stretch to the third.
So you need to go back into your, flip back into your adaptive component, and most likely your third point right here, you didn't snap to it. So if any time it doesn't fully stretch, that's because there's probably a snap issue. And so you're actually going to have to redraw that shape. But again, click on it and hit dissolve, because if you delete it, it's going to delete the points as well. Okay, so now I can click on my adaptive component, and if you hold in the control key, so I left click on the component, hold in control, and then drag with your mouse, okay, holding in the left mouse button. Go ahead and drag,
Oh, fun.
and you can see how your adaptive component is being copied, but it's being copied associated with the rails. And so I can do that a number of different times, and you should see that your component stretches and changes. So I made something, a little wireframe model so far that looks like this. And because these adaptive components are connected to these curves, and our curves have some set of parameters. You know, for instance, we didn't really set up any parameters yet, except for the top one and the bottom one are associated with a different level plane. I could click on level 2, and we could change that dimension. I'll do something drastic like 100 feet. And when I update that, you should see all of your wireframe components stretch with it. Same thing as if I take any of these curves, and if I were to move them, so just on the level 1 plane, I'm moving my splines out. You can see how all of that constantly adapts and changes. What this is doing is it's allowing you to, some of you might have some complex curves. Well, we all have complex curves, but what I'm thinking is a lot of you are having some lofting problems from one curve to the other when we're just selecting curves from the endpoints. But if you have a series of section curves that might be associated with those original rails that you've already developed, you could try lofting the section curves from this adaptive component. And so what you can do is, basically what I've done is I've created this wireframe. If I tab over your adaptive component, if you tab over, you should be able to select one of the curves at a time. And I can tab over, hold in control, select the next one, tab over, hold in control, select this one. And so I'm selecting all of the section curves that are associated with this one plane. And if I create a form, I get a lofted surface that might help you if you're having trouble trying to loft your other curves in the other direction. And again, all of this is adaptive, so by changing any dimension, your surface will update and everything will be parametric. And once you make that surface, if you turn on the X-ray command, you can further I think they're all tied to each other now, so I can't really move these without moving the... I'd have to have some parameters set up, it looks like. I was trying to move this curve again.
How do you select all those surfaces? I know you said...
To do what now? Select the surface? If you click on or hover over and keep selecting tab, you should see form element or model lines. There we go. I need the model line to move. That works.
Tab it, find it, tab, and then hold control.
Did everyone get that sequence to work out?
Control tab because it'll change things.
Yeah,
What's
I
the-
tried that.
It might change views if you control tab.
Together?
Yeah. Like you have to let control up when you tab.
Oh yeah.
You don't have to use control just when you access.
Only when you actually select.
Yeah.
So control is from like Alt in SketchUp or in a lot of other programs? Because it seems like an Illustrator, you hold up Alt and drag something and it creates a copy.
Yeah. Yeah. Control in I think in Rhino and then also Revit.
Control is in Rhino too?
Is your add.
So that doesn't follow the splines.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't follow.
So what happens there? You probably notice
Like the surface doesn't follow this line.
The surface, if you look at my surface at the top here, you see how my lofted surface doesn't follow that bottom rail? That's because you're actually lofting the section curves along that rail. And so in order to, if you want it to be real precise and tighter to that curve, you probably need to add in another adaptive component. That would be kind of split the difference.
Can you add the splines in to the selection?
Probably not. Let's see. Yeah, because if I click on this adaptive component and do control, it allowed me to add the adaptive component, but because I didn't have that selected, that edge selected, I'd have to go back and dissolve my surface and redo it.
How complex could the adaptive component be?
What are you thinking?
I mean, could it be a surface?
Yeah, and so what we're going to do now is we're going to go back into the adaptive component, and because we've got this wireframe component, we can actually add a surface, we can add any kind of thickness to it and kind of modify it, and it becomes kind of this tectonic structure that you can then start to further develop. So if everyone at least has this part established, it goes wherever it wants to. So what probably happened is if you place this adaptive component, you have to make sure that you're snapping to the end points of the rail.
Yeah.
So let's delete that.
Sorry, it wasn't great.
Why? What'd you say?
Maybe because we know what was going on, views in your AC.
Oh, we're getting like
I hear you going, why is it working?
we're taking it to the next
Yeah,
level.
we're like overachieving.
Yeah.
I've already played this, so you don't act like you're all special. I already got it to lock correctly. I have an iPod that shuffle that like doesn't have. No, she can't. No, I'm putting it back so that it doesn't on. I have the one that doesn't have any controls.
I hate that. Oh my
I
god.
hate
I
that
had
one.
3 of those.
Bro, I just bought an adapter.
It's the 3rd generation shuffle.
Yeah, I just bought an adapter so that like I don't have to use the.
Oh, good. Yeah, that was what broke my house on.
Yeah.
I would have it this year for like 3.
Such a pain.
Yeah, you should put them wherever you want to.
Also, when you're placing your adaptive component, you do want to make sure, let's say I'm in my 3D view here.
How are you doing there, champ?
Make sure that you have it set to place on face and not place on work plane. This way you're able to snap to all the endpoints of the rail, and then it will definitely allow you to copy it along the rail, and it will adapt to all of those lines. Okay. So now what we can do is go back into our adaptive component, and I'll click on a 3D view. So you should be in the triangle that's just the numbered points. And I'm going to place another point element that is just somewhere on any of the lines. It doesn't matter which one. And the reason I'm doing that is when you click on this point that we just placed and say show reference plane, I get my plane that's perpendicular to that line. Notice these other points aren't perpendicular. They don't show a perpendicular to the surface normal of that line. And so basically what I want to do is use this point as a work plane to just create a pipe rail that would go along this that we could then import back into our other file, and then we have a tectonic pipe structure. So to do this, we've got the point. This will be just like what we did a while back here. I'm going to click on model line. I want to pick the placement plane. And I'm going to pick this perpendicular plane to the line. And then remember, it defaults back to the line, and we'll have to pick circle again. And then I'm going to snap to that point and give it some radius. And I'll change this to be something more like maybe 6 inches. And then we can select both of these and say create form, and we get our pipe. And because this is the same file, that's your adaptive point or your adaptive component, you can load this into your project and say overwrite the existing version and its parameter values. And so now when you zoom in, you actually have, instead of a wireframe model, you have a surface with a tectonic pipe structure. And we can keep adding to this adaptive component. So another thing I could do is, I just switched into it. And I'm going to turn on my wireframe view so that I can see the center line, which is all green now. These are reference planes. And because these are just a chain of reference lines, I can say create form and create a solid form. All right, where are you guys not at?
Did you load it into the other file already?
Yeah, I've already loaded my pipe frame adaptive component into the other file, and I overwrote a little message came on, and I said overwrite the family and its values, and so my adaptive components that were already placed updated. And then you can, because it's still open, you can come back here, and I'm switching back into that file. Or you can always click on your family and say edit family, and that will just open it back up as well. Even though it's still there in the background, it just switches the view.
I can't get my circle to wrap the entire form. It's only wrapping, or I selected the reference plane of that Docker created.
Oh, no.
Select.
It's the block, right? The bluish block. Where the scale is, 2/4.
But it would be off.
Okay, everyone into your adaptive component and turn on the wireframe view. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to be able to select the center reference planes that are associated with that rail. It should be a green line, and if you select it and then click on create form, solid form, before I continue, look at the very bottom of your screen. You'll see this little thumbnail image pop up. It's basically saying if you pick the one on the left, you're going to make an extruded surface or extruded form out of that extrusion. And if you pick the one off to the right, you're just going to make a flat surface plane. For now, I'm just going to select the one on the right.
Mine didn't give me that option.
Okay.
Basically.
So if you did not get that option, okay, you have to make sure that you're selecting the middle lines. Okay, so create form, solid form.
Oh, sure, because now you're older.
That's right. That's how it works.
Of course.
Anyone else not get the little thumbnail?
Yeah, I'm not getting it here.
You say you select the green lines?
Yeah, just make sure if you hover over the middle, you should see all these dashed lines that are basically representing all the different planes of the green lines, which are reference planes. As long as you have all that highlighted, left click once and select that. Then say create form, and then you get the thumbnail images at the bottom. Not getting it?
I don't know. I've been with
Which is why mine is red, it has the same number. S1 or whatever. It's not Simon, it's not. Home is made by, it's pretty sweet. No, it's.
I think there was already an extrusion there.
That's why.
Don't make me unplug your mouth again.
I don't know
I had
why.
I was nice to plug it back. I didn't think
Both sides are broken.
That's what the other one was too.
I'm not saying.
So you're saying they're right?
Anyone else not get that?
No, she did. Huh?
Right, I don't know whether they're right.
You know, we're just going the extra mile.
I tried to fly the right.
It's not giving you the.
Oh, look, fuck that.
Chris sent me a Groupon. No, I told you I got. That's right, because it was like $2.
You dare have like.
Yeah, now I got a studio.
Okay, so now that you've made that surface, you can load it back into the project and again overwrite, and you get some additional tectonic structure and a form in the middle that's just a surface. Now we're going to do one last thing to that surface. Everything in Revit, if we're just dealing with a surface, we can divide that surface up and then apply a pattern to it. And this is going to be the same philosophy that we're going to use on your complex surfaces in order to make a tectonic structure go and follow your entire complex curves that you're currently working on. So this will be the first time I'm going to introduce this, and again I'll go over it again a couple more times through different methods in following classes. So again, I'm just going to go back to my adaptive component. I'll get in the 3D view. If I select the surface, and you can do this with any surface, you should see this next to create form, there's divide surface that is shown up. We can click on that, and in your options bar, you get a U grid and a V grid. The U and the V directions in Revit and also in Rhino and any other 3D program, again, is the X, Y if you're along the surface, actually on the surface. The U is the X and the V is the Y. And then again, I mentioned surface normal is perpendicular to the Z axis out. So what this is telling you is your U grid right now by default is 12 by 12. I could change the numbers to have different divisions. and if I still have my grid highlighted, if you look off into the left, you can also change the type of grid that you have with these preset patterns. And I'm going to tell you right now that Revit doesn't allow you to actually change or edit these patterns. These are built into the program at the current version. So these are the only patterns that you can currently pick from. But if you say no pattern, basically what it's doing is creating a solid surface, and it's further dividing up your surface element into hexagons and checkerboard patterns and all kinds of things like that. So I'll select this checkerboard. Maybe I'll give it some more divisions here. Of course, load that into the project, and again, further develop those adaptive components. And again, you can pick those triangles at any time and slide them.
Jim, mine's having an error.
What's the error?
I don't know.
Yeah, unable to create form.
Error can't be ignored.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the nice thing about Revit, and you'll find this on every blog about checking errors, is in Revit, you get these obscure messages that say can't do something and it never tells you why.
Yeah.
Let me look at your adaptive component. Cancel. Try changing the number of divisions of that to something less for now.
That's why I put this over simply because trying to figure out
Okay, I'm not sure why. Who else is getting the error? You?
SketchUp, I can't. I just look at it. And usually I have to file it down to like now I have some it's not like I don't know what to do. I don't really care anymore.
I didn't do anything.
Huh?
Because I plugged it back in again.
I used it right. Listen.
I'm just saying.
Oh, you got the error before too.
Don't use that.
I was saying it's unable to make your
There's a petition that you saw. So they're like a set, that's fine.
That's why those
Yeah, some of you have been getting an error that says it can't create the form element, and I'm not sure exactly why. Like only a couple of you would get that.
Yeah. I just deleted my service.
Okay. Well,
Did you get for playing with it? I'll just follow along. That's okay.
well, that's all I'm going to show on this part. I want to get into another form of massing that isn't so complicated, but starts to use just the void form, because a lot of you just have pathways. This would be something you might use to do a wall or a pathway or something, or a platform on your tower is the next method I'm going to go over real quick. So you can just save that. You can experiment with how to deal with this. We're going to dive into the adaptive component and the surface making a little bit later. But the reason I brought this up is I wanted to show you some more of the possibilities, but also if you're having definitely the trouble lofting your curves, this may be a good workaround. I'm gonna close out of each of these. And I'm going to start a new conceptual mass. And let's go ahead and place a point element. And we'll just, I'm going to place it and then turn on its reference planes by clicking on it and saying show reference always. And then I'm going to align it to each of these axes so I can get it to the 0, 0, 0 mark, but I'm not going to lock the padlock.
This is another conceptual mass.
Yeah, this is a new conceptual mass, brand new file. And then the level 1 floor plan, so click on level 1 floor plan. I'm going to draw, instead of drawing with a model line, I'm going to draw with reference lines. The difference is a model line is kind of this one-off element that doesn't have any kind of X, Y, and Z planes associated with it, versus a reference line will actually have, you'll notice when we were doing the sweep command and we selected the green line, you saw kind of this dashed X, Y, and Z plane showing up, just like you get when you're actually using the point. You get these planes that you can actually draw on and actually further use this to reference. Essentially, when you make a reference line, because if you make a reference line and there's a reference point that's associated with it, those two create their own behavioral relationship to one another. So that if you start to manipulate the point, let's say you rotate the point, your reference lines will also rotate along with it. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to click on the reference lines, and when I place it, I'm going to do a, let's do a rectangle. And I'm going to select placement plane and pick. I'm going to say pick a plane. Yeah, and then say pick a plane. I don't know why the extra dialog box just happened. And then we're going to select the horizontal reference plane of that reference point. And then, like everything else in Revit so far, it went back and changed everything back to model line and a point. And I want to change this back to a rectangle and reference. What's going on here? Then I drew a rectangle, you should get something.
So you know it's wrong.
Yeah, so you should, because I picked the plane and then I drew the rectangle, and we were on that horizontal plane of the point, you should now have a relationship between that point and then also this plane that you created the rectangle. Did everyone get that to work out? It's kind of tricky a little bit. Yeah, I'm gonna delete that and start over here. It might be easier to even do it in 3D. Let's try it that way. So again, I'm going to click on reference line. Instead of model lines, click on reference. And I'm going to pick, and you might get an extra dialog box that pops up that says pick a plane, but I'm going to pick this horizontal plane of the point. And it defaults back, I wish it wouldn't, to all these model line and point settings. So if I click on reference line and rectangle, I'm just going to draw a left click from one corner to the other. You should know that that has a behavioral relationship now. If you pick the point and move it, you should see that reference plane move up and down as well. Also, if you pick that point and change the rotation angle, your reference rectangle should also rotate with the point. And what you can see here is we didn't have to set up a whole set of parameters to make all this happen, like we had to with the model lines. So everyone get that? Now what I'm going to do is go into an elevation view, and I'm going to create another datum. So home, level datum. I'll create a level 2. And make sure it creates a floor plan view. And I'm going to take all of this and copy it up to the next level. So I'm going to select the reference lines and that point. So I selected both of those, and you should have a clipboard setting kind of here in the middle. I'm going to click on copy to clipboard, or you could just hit Control-C on your keyboard. And then I'm going to click the down arrow under paste, and there's an option there called aligned to selected levels. If I click on that and choose level 2, I basically just copied and pasted that. Now these reference point and the reference plane should be associated with level 2.
So those act separate of one another?
Yeah.
Okay.
So now it's just a copy, but they're not, these, the one on top and the one on bottom do not have a relationship. They only have a relationship to that reference plane.
If you were to connect a line from one to the other, as you know, from one point to another, would it do that as well? Like,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm going to exaggerate this a little bit, made it like 200 feet apart. So what you're asking is if you click on a line and made a model line and make sure 3D snapping is on, you could connect one point to the other. And if I take this point and rotate it,
okay,
you see how the line also moved with it. I'm going to delete that model line, and if I select both of these reference planes, and I can also create forms with reference planes. Now we can change the properties of that center point, so I could rotate it. And you can get that form to kind of twist and turn. And what I didn't do is spend the time setting up all the parameters. Right now this is all kind of a one-off item. But you all know how to set your point. You could set the rotation angle in a parameter for this one particular point and another rotation angle at the other bottom, and then change parameters and have this thing twist and turn. What are you trying to do?
Draw a line.
Make sure 3D snapping is on when you draw a line. You're trying to connect the line from one to the other.
Double right there.
Why would I get all
Nope. 30,000 is as high as you can go. They don't have buildings over 30,000 feet? What?
Okay, and one last item here. I'm gonna maneuver this back down a little bit. Yeah.
Is there a way to like zoom to the extent of your?
Yeah, ZF when you are working will do zoom full extents. Now you can also create a surface. I'm going to create a just a couple of splines here real quick. I think I'm drawing on level 2, doesn't matter. Let's say this is the curve of my path for my bridge. If you close the shape, so far everyone knows how to create their parametric splines, because you've already been doing that with the complex shapes. You could do the same theory and have these in the same plane, and if you close them, you should be able to select it and say create form, and I get that option again for it to make an extruded surface or just a plane surface. So now I have a flat surface that could be your bridge. So if you had all those points that were associated with the edge of your bridge, you could just create a flat surface. And you could also, let's see. I'm not going to worry about that right now. We're running out of time. Let's do a void real quick. So anyway, that plane surface would be a good way to create a platform. You know, if you just had a series of platforms that were associated with it, like a tower, or you know, you could do your walking path. You could also set it up where you, if you have one level to the other, I could actually have a spline. Let's see, if I create a point on level 2, and then do another point on level 1, and then if you create a line, make sure 3D snapping is on.
Nothing level 2, so doesn't matter.
And switch to level 2. Oh, there we go. So you could also have your path going from level 1 to level 2. You could have kind of this straight thing that then if you change level 1 and level 2, obviously all that will update as well. Let me go to this void real quick. Voids are a little bit tricky because they disappear after you create them. And so if you want to make them parametric, I'm going to take out the twist out of my tower for the moment. What I normally would do is create a form. So on level 1, I'm just going to draw a rectangular box. And when I create this form, I'm going to create it as a solid form. And And the reason I'm creating it as a solid form is as soon as you make a void form, it disappears and it's hard to assign parameters to it. So before I create that form, I could probably add in some dimensions. I'm not going to do all the parameter setup right now. But we could add in dimensions and set up these as parameters so we could change the length and the width of the base. And then when we create the extrusion, create form, and pick our solid, if you hover over or tab over that form element so that you can select the whole thing, on one of the temporary dimensions you should have a height associated with it that we could click on that dimension string and make it into an actual permanent dimension that we could also assign a parameter to. So I'm going to create add parameter. I'll just call it h for height for right now. And then assign this. And then we'll test it out, make sure we can change that value, and your height of your extrusion should also change. Now that we've done that, we can tab over this again until we select the whole entire thing. And off to the right, under solid versus void, change it from a solid to a void. And you now have cut that shape out of your object. And we can play around with the twisting of it again. And you should be able to come in here and also change the height of that void again. Now the trick with voids is that you have to draw the void form after you've created the solid form. Otherwise it won't know that it's supposed to be cutting another object. So always make sure you do that after you've created your other solids.
What's the last step?
Oh, you changed it right here.
The last step was to take your
Right there. Solid void.
so if you have something that looks like this, if you tab over it until the whole thing highlights and click it, you can change it from a solid to a void. You can also keep tabbing over the empty space, and eventually you'll get the void form to show up. But you notice when you left click on it, you don't get any of the options again to change it back. So that's why I like to set up the solid first, because once it's a void, it loses a lot of its other properties. But what that would be used for is if you're looking at my model, you can see I've got these curved walls on either end of the bridge, and then I've got a little notch that was coming down to hold in the actual placement of this one part of the bridge to the other. So I might actually create this as a extrusion and then have another parametric void that's associated with this curve that could cut out this notch for this element. So I kind of showed you a lot tonight, and the reason for that is, as you know, I'm out on Thursday. I'm headed to Colorado for a quick trip out there to check on one of my projects that I just completed, and they're doing kind of this grand opening ceremony. So I'm going to be out there on Friday. I'm leaving Thursday night, so we're not going to have class. So next time we'll meet is Tuesday, and for your assignment, I basically want you guys to pretty much complete your model just with the plane surfaces. That means you should have most of your curves already established. You should have your complex surfaces created for your funky foam pieces. If you're still having problems with making those loft together, you might want to try that adaptive component set of commands that we just went over tonight and try lofting it that way. Then you're going to want to just create your wall component and your platforms, and probably want them associated with some sort of plane that could eventually move up and down. So just the same methods that we've worked with, you might have each of these, like for instance, I would make a wall, this wall that's at the end of the bridge, I'd make that as one component that has a void in it, because then I can place it again on the other side when I'm, kind of putting my compilation model together, and it'd be the same piece that I could also change parametrically as well. Same thing with the bridge component, and then this platform, if you have a tower or on my bridge, I've got kind of this, hard to see, but this observation deck that goes down and it's connected up to this top portion of the bridge. That sloping surface is going to represent stairs. If you have any kind of stairs that you think you're going to have in your model, don't worry about modeling that plane, because we're going to be bringing all this into a project environment where stairs are automatically generated from one surface to the other. So you don't need to model stairs or ramps or anything like that in the conceptual design environment. What we want, the goal is to generate all of your surfaces. Again, remember we're using this as an underlay that we're going to eventually apply all these tectonic structures to and further develop this into a very complex tectonic form. Any questions? All right, and then basically when I get back, the whole next week and the classes after that, we're going to get into another family environment called the curtain wall panel, or it's called the curtain panel pattern-based family component, which is something that we can use with adaptive components and the conceptual mass environment. So we'll go with that. I'll stay after for any questions.
Jeremy.
Yep.
Look at this for a second.
Yeah.
Just like that.
What if it doesn't fit to our cars?
But I have the leftover.
That's why that's why you import this and modify it.
There's not a house.
Just horrible.
I will disagree with you.
And but if I delete it, it's like, if you delete it, it does.
I'm fine, I gotta get on my stuff.
A minute ago, I gave you that.
That's changing. Is that associated?